Hi, welcome to part 2 of the climate change video, Fitting the Pieces Together. Today we're going to talk about why should we care and what can we do. Global average temperatures are expected to increase by about 2 to 13 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. That might not sound like a lot, so what's the big deal? Well, the problem is that really small changes in average global temperature can really lend to large changes in environment. So let's look at some of those expected changes. There will always be natural variability, and some places and some years will be warmer or cooler than average. In general, however, summers will get hotter, not only because of higher temperatures, but also because humidities will increase. That means that heat waves, like the one that killed 35,000 people in Europe in 2003, will become more common. On the plus side, winters will be warmer in many places, reducing heating bills, and the number of days with frost is likely to decrease. The oceans will continue their rise in the coming century. The IPCC's best estimates range from a few inches to a few feet by 2100. If the rise is 2 feet, the U.S. could lose 10,000 square miles. If they rise 3, they will inundate Miami and most of coastal Florida. Sea level rise also increases coastal erosion and the loss of coastal wetlands, and salt water can spoil freshwater drinking supplies. Coastal populations become even more vulnerable to storm surge and flooding. Considering that half the world's population lives near coasts, sea level rise is a serious concern. The big unknown is how much the planet's ice sheets will melt. A warming planet means continuing changes in its ecosystems. As the oceans absorb more carbon dioxide, the chemistry of the ocean changes, putting many sea creatures at risk. The IPCC projects that by 2100, the pH of the ocean will drop to its lowest point in at least 20 million years. As temperatures get milder, mosquitoes, ticks, rodents, and other disease carriers will expand their range, particularly in developing countries. Warmer temperatures will also mean less snow overall at certain latitudes because more will fall as rain, and the snow that does fall will melt faster. This affects people living in areas that depend on snow-fed reservoirs for their drinking water. The IPCC projects increases of 5 to 20% in crop yields in the first decades of the century. But the crops will be more prone to failure if climate variability increases and precipitation becomes less dependable. And ironically, with higher temperatures comes an increased potential for killing freezes. This is because plants start growing earlier, making them more vulnerable to sudden springtime cold spells and freezes. And we saw this happen here in Michigan last spring, where we had some very, very warm days in the spring and all of the fruit trees started to bud, and then there were several freezes which then killed all of the possible fruit. And so that's why we didn't have a lot of peaches, and Michigan's cherry crop was almost non-existent this last year. Nothing in science is 100% certain. There are no laboratory experiments that can tell us what the future will be. The planet is the test tube. What don't we know? Is there some climate processes we don't know about? Well, so far, research over the years has strengthened the conclusion that humans are adversely influencing climate, but scientific knowledge is still evolving. We don't know how things might change in the future, such as will alternative energy sources become widely available and how soon? Will some yet to be discovered technology be able to clean CO2 out of the air? And how will changing economics, global population, and political processes affect our ability to tackle the problem? The International Panel on Climate Change, the group that produces the main reports on climate change, is a scientific intergovernmental body set up by the World Meteorological Organization and by the United Nations Environment Program in 1988. The IPCC process involves hundreds of scientists from about 140 countries, a variety of fields, and a range of views. Their function is to assess the latest peer-reviewed literature, compare different computer model results from various sources, and to achieve a consensus about where the weight of the evidence points and where uncertainties lie. Based on the evidence accumulated over the last 40 years, these are some of their main conclusions. The words in red were very carefully chosen to reflect quantifiable estimates. So very high confidence means the statement has at least 9 out of 10 chance of being correct. Very likely means the scientists are more than 90% sure, and likely means that they are more than 66% sure. Please take a moment and pause the video so that you can read through these. Well, but what about those that disagree? Well, scientists always disagree. Although many statements that climate change is bogus are based on false or incomplete information, there have also been some legitimate scientific criticisms of climate change science. It's important to separate one from the other particularly since misinformation can be stubbornly persistent, especially on the internet. The important questions posed by reputable climate scientists who disagree with most of their peers are these. Do we know enough about the drivers of climate to know what causes change? Are we underestimating the Earth system's complexity? Are climate models good enough to accurately simulate the complex climate systems? And lastly, are there processes that will limit warming naturally? Over the last 40 years, various theories have been proposed. Components of climate understanding have been questioned, data have been critiqued, but so far no credible competing explanations have been shown to fit the preponderance of evidence. Also, there are scientists who disagree with the IPCC. They believe the conclusions are too conservative and that things will be worse than projected. There is some evidence to support their views. Arctic sea ice is melting much faster than scientists predicted. Also, actual fossil fuel emissions in recent years have exceeded all but the highest IPCC projections, growing 4 times faster than in the 1990s. Some argue that the IPCC near-future assumptions about global energy use are too optimistic. A recent study also concludes that the IPCC estimates were too optimistic with regard to how quickly developing countries would be able to afford technologies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. A survey conducted in 2007 by George Mason University of U.S. scientists who have expertise in climate science, not just a scientific background, they asked them what they think. 97% of the almost 500 respondents agreed that global average temperatures have increased during the past century. That's up 60% since 1991. 84% believe human activities are causing the warming, and only 5% disagree. So the survey does indicate that the bulk of climate scientists, those most knowledgeable about the field, now agree that human activity contributes to global warming. When looking at information, particularly on the web, search out contrasting opinions to see what others say about a topic, and evaluate the source. Is it someone with real expertise or just someone with an opinion? So what is next? What can we do about this? Reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and our use of fossil fuels will not be easy, but it is doable. Here's how some researchers at Princeton view it. Our current path is toward doubling CO2 emissions in the next 50 years, with even greater increases beyond that. In order to get off this path, we need to find ways to keep emissions constant for the next 50 years and then reduce them during the second half of the century. As you can see, there are many ways society can approach the struggle to reduce carbon emissions, but there is no single solution. Many of the strategies mentioned are the realm of governments, and the ever-growing world population means that we'll have to work that much harder to reduce global emissions. But on an individual level, there are many things you can do to make a difference. Take a second to pause the video and read through these individual actions, things that you can do to help. Scientists are still working on the puzzle. The IPCC's 5th assessment report is planned for 2013-2014. Climate models are being improved, and more data is being collected. However, the puzzle is already complete enough to know that we need to take action. Thank you for listening to part 2 of the video, and make sure that you have enough notes written down. Rewatch any parts if necessary.